Okay. Hi, Peter. Thank you for coming today. Peter is here to talk to us as a subject matter expert about ADHD. Peter, maybe you can just start with a little intro and tell us what your experience is.
Yeah, sure. My name's Peter Spears. I am someone who has been diagnosed as an adult with ADHD. Um, sort of um, learned about this after discovering that my son had it. He's my first child. Um, and it through that process kind of discovered it about myself.
Yeah.
So it's fairly new to me. This happened about I'm 48 years old, and I've lived with this my entire life, but only realized it when I was about 40.
Okay.
So it's been a bit of a journey.
I bet. Okay. So, I mean, I've seen definitions online and such, but in your terms, what is ADHD?
Yeah, so it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and this is primarily a condition that affects a person's executive function. And what that kind of means is that it sort of inhibits their ability to do things. It's kind of this process where you have a hard time commanding yourself to just do something. Um, Externally it can sort of present like procrastination, um, and it can look like bad emotional control or poor emotional control. um, so someone with ADHD may have a short temperature, short temperature, a short temper,
Got
or
it.
be emotionally sensitive.
Okay.
um, and just in my notes here that I'll send you a little bit later, I have a link that sort of has a general description of that. That can help you out.
Okay, awesome. Are you aware if any people are predisposed to the condition? Is there any anything like
Yeah,
that?
so basically, I mean, it as far as I'm aware, it does present equally in men and women. But typically, what happens is boys, and it would use the term boys, are diagnosed earlier
Okay.
because it can just some of the behaviors show up a little more. I guess aggressively would be the right word, but they tend to present earlier, like at younger ages, and in ways that bother people. So
Got
people want
it.
to do things about it, right? Like they just can be rambunctious, or a little bit, they're loud or something. And this is just it's just a weird thing about what boys are when they're
Okay.
at that age, right?
Right.
Um, but then I think, to go further into that, you have a question about genetic inheritance, and
Yeah.
it is believed to be genetically inheritable. Let me just pull up my note here. Um, so basically, yeah, like if one of your parents has it, you're likely to have it,
Okay.
and if you have it, your children are likely to have it. Um, uh, and just this is one of my personal anecdotes is I don't think either of my parents have it. My dad might, but it's a spectrum, so it can be hard to diagnose specifically. And some people, it doesn't really affect them that much, and other people it really can affect their lives. Um, and then I'm one of three kids, and as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one with it.
Okay.
And then I have four kids, and only one that we
That's,
know of that has it. And then my wife doesn't have it, but her brother thinks he might.
hmm.
So just to sort of give you a bit of an idea, that's sort of my family. Um, and again, like I'll go into this a little bit later, but it is considered a spectrum, right? So
Right.
so and there are a few differences. So it can be hard to really pin it down, um, to say definitively this person has it.
Okay.
Um,
Makes
yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
Are there any? Is there any research that shows sort of what part of the brain is affected?
Yes, there actually is, and this is not my expertise. So I have in my comments here a link that goes into sort of the physiological parts of ADHD, but it does seem to be like a frontal lobe thing. This is kind of um, uh, um, I think I cover this in the next question, um, which is what are the signs and symptoms of ADHD? And
Yeah.
it's so. Oh, maybe I don't. I do it later. Let's just keep going. Yeah, we'll stick with the link. Have a look at that. That's got some really good information in it. Um, uh, and that may be, because it's sort of considered a psychological disorder, but it does have some physiological things. There's certain parts of the brain that are uh, measurably smaller than a normal person, I guess.
Okay.
um, yeah, okay, so let's
So you
maybe just
mentioned
continue.
the signs and symptoms. You mentioned earlier maybe emotional and short temper, that kind of thing. Anything else that you can think of?
So it's common to see a person with ADHD seem very smart but be reluctant to do any work.
Okay.
They'll be easily distracted. They can lose their train of thought like mid sentence, like while they're actively talking to you.
Okay.
Um, uh, and they may start pretty ambitious projects and just never finish them.
Okay.
They'll kind of get partway through them, find that it's just too hard or not exactly what they expected, and they'll just put it aside. And like a good example would be they'll just decide one day I'm going to learn how to play guitar, and 2 months later it's gathering dust in the corner, right? You know what I mean?
Okay.
um so, and then they may seem forgetful. They'll miss deadlines. They can be late to meetings or appointments, and seem unprepared.
Okay.
Um, and then this is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't really talk about or don't maybe know about ADHD. But there's this thing called hyperfocus.
Okay.
Um, and it kind of acts like like it can counteract a lot of those other parts of it, but it's really difficult to control. It's not something that you can really just decide, oh, I'm gonna hyper focus on this and get it done. But sometimes it just happens. Like somebody will be sort of fascinated by this new thing, and they will devote their entire attention to it, and it's a bit like having blinders on.
Okay.
Um, and but that can lead to other problems, right? Like you're so focused on this new video game that you've got, you're just not going to do the dishes or clean the house, right?
Right.
So so and this is something that I've found is some people describe this hyper focus as a superpower, because it really can sort of amplify your ability to learn how to do things, but
Mhm.
because it's so difficult to control, it's
You don't get to
um,
choose what you want to learn.
yeah, it's sometimes, yeah. I think as like what I've noticed is as I've gotten older, I can kind of manage it a little better. And
Okay.
I may be one of those people that's a bit of an exception. Like I've gone through life um uh with this and not knowing that I've had it, and I've
Okay.
found ways to sort of manage why my life is the way it is.
Yeah.
And I've managed to be reasonably successful. But some people, it can be really debilitating, and even this hyper focus can actually be really invasive in your life. It can
Mhm.
this little it's almost a little shiny object that a magpie likes will be a
Yeah.
fascinating thing, and it'll occupy a week of your life.
Oh my gosh.
And it can be it's a real challenge. And I make a note here that it can actually look a lot like addiction.
Okay.
um, and in fact there's some studies like we go into this a little bit later, but there's medical treatments or say pharmaceutical treatments are available for the symptoms of ADHD. But some people end up medicating themselves, right? And
Right.
this can be with alcohol and various drugs, and it can lead to real problems um, because of this effect, that they'll even if they aren't a totally addictive substance, they can become addicted to it because it can act like it's like a hyper focus can take over that. Oh, this thing kind of helps me, and
I'm
it
gonna,
can. Yeah. So you focus in on it, and it you become obsessed with it, and it's like you've built a what do you call that kind of a uh, addiction? It's not a physical addiction. It's like a mental addiction, right?
yeah,
You've
it's
sort
just
of.
like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
you go back to the same, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, and are these things that you're talking about, the hyper focus or the picking up things and leaving them, that kind of thing, are they consistent across everyone with ADHD? I know you said that the severity can be different, but are those core things usually the same?
So it is a spectrum, right? So these things will be present, and often it'll be some are um, some affect people more than others. People with ADHD may see that there actually is kind of two types that we get into with one of your other questions. What's the difference between ADD and
Yep,
ADHD?
yep,
I'll explain a little bit later, but um, there there actually are considered a couple of different types, and
okay,
so that's where you get this spectrum, and it kind of goes from there's the inattentive and hyperactive,
okay,
and it's sort of everything in between. So some people might seem uh, easily distracted um, uh, or forgetful, and then that goes all the way up to this sort of uh, the fidgety and anxious type of person.
right,
Um, so yeah, and there's really a really broad number of sort of symptoms of it. Um,
okay. My next question, maybe you can speak to it on personal level, or if not, just in your general knowledge, but which areas of your everyday life are impacted by ADHD?
yeah, so it really is something that will affect just about every part of your life. Um, uh, um, it kind of, I guess, in my experience, it really affects it. Excuse me. It affects my ability to plan and organize, um, and um, and it can really it's a learning disability, right? So it can affect the way it actually affects the way you learn, and part of that I think is this the hyper focus kind of allows you to jump in feet first, and you can kind of like turn on extra parts of your brain and learn something quick,
Right.
but you don't actually learn how you learned how to do that. So
Okay.
you kind of it's really weird. So like you might seem like you're really good at something on the first go, but then the next time you try it, you're awful at it because you
Okay,
kind of didn't learn how to do it. You just did it, and you
got
were
it.
okay at it. It's almost like you turn your brain off and stop thinking, and you can just do it.
You,
Yeah, right.
right?
um
You don't have like the buildup of, you learn one skill and then you build on it, and then you build on it. It's just you can just do it.
Yeah, exactly. But then,
Okay.
because you haven't really done that sort of like proper development of a skill, you kind of don't have that skill, right?
Right.
You have this ability to just sort of do things the first time and then never again, right? So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, that can be frustrating.
it can, yeah, it's pretty frustrating. Yeah, it's an adventure
Okay.
sometimes. Yeah.
Are there any
Um,
other like activities that or general everyday things that you can think of that make it more difficult or less difficult?
um, so that's a hard one for me to answer. I think it um, and I actually don't think I made a comment about this one, but yeah, it really does uh, there's a lot of shame associated with some of those aspects, like you know um, you'll be late for work, or you're not very good at cleaning your house, so you don't want to have friends over, um, and these things, and what can happen is all those little things can pile up, and they're just, they might seem like just little tiny things, but they end up piling up, and then um, it becomes this like it actually becomes a mountain of things that need to get done because you've put off all these other things.
Right.
um, and it can be really, it's really embarrassing, um, uh, and it can sort of uh, freeze you up, like you become uh, withdrawn from, maybe from seeing your friends, or and you don't want to share these sort of aspects of your life, which probably, if you did share them, people would offer to help, and
Yeah.
um it can be really hard. um um yeah, and like I say, like it's often the worst parts of it are these the tiny little things in your life, that you might not think about. It's just a simple thing, like cleaning the toilet, or doing the dishes, or just or doing your laundry, these little tiny things. Um, and there's this sort of tendency to just let that stuff go because it's, I guess, boring.
Yep.
It's not an exciting thing to do, so I'll do that later, and
Yeah.
then it becomes this
Thing.
mountain of things that you have to
Yeah.
do, right? Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
You touched on it briefly before, but the difference between ADD and ADHD, is that just the hyperactivity component?
Yeah, pretty much. And so what that boils down to now is, so my note here. So ADD is considered an outdated term now.
Okay.
So they've just sort of switched this to, now it's somebody who would have before been considered ADD, which would have been just attention deficit disorder,
Yep.
without the hyperactivity.
Right.
Um, so now they're just considered somebody with ADHD, but they're called inattentive type.
Got it. Okay.
So you have ADHD inattentive and ADHD hyperactive.
Right.
Um, and again, and this is one of those things where getting into diagnosing it specifically um, is maybe a bit of a moot point, because we've seen that they're basically the two ends of the same spectrum. Um, Treatment would be very similar.
Right.
Um, uh, and those, again, that can be a pretty varied topic. Um, yeah,
That
and then
rolls into
maybe
my,
just to give you a little thing. So I have
sure.
um, uh, so someone with, oh no, okay, I've already covered that. Yeah, let's just move on.
Okay. What you said actually rolls into my next question. How is ADHD treated?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So ADHD can be treated with stimulants. It's actually, I always found this really interesting that you would treat somebody who's hyperactive by getting them more hyper.
Yeah.
Um,
God.
but just as a sort of a personal thing, I use coffee.
Okay.
Um, right. It's caffeine. I try to manage it. I try not to drink too much. But I find it just that little bit of boost can
Yeah.
help me just focus a little bit better.
Okay.
Um, and then um, my statement here says that ADHD can be treated with stimulants and therapy.
Okay.
And I make a little note here that I've heard the term cognitive behavior therapy used, but I think there might be some controversy around that. So I would just say therapy.
In general.
Um, yes, therapy in general, and this can take on a bunch of different forms,
Yeah.
right? And this can be, going to see a professional psychologist. Um, but there's a big thing in ADHD treatment called coaching,
Okay.
and where people with ADHD can hire coaches, and they can just help them uh, uh, learn skills to manage their condition better, and by actively, but sort of actively participating in their lives, like saying, oh, if you're having trouble getting up for work on time, here's some things we can do to manage that. Or oh, you're having trouble keeping on top of your chores. Well, we can, let's develop a routine for you.
Oh, that's
um,
really interesting.
yeah, it really is. And there's all sorts of there's groups around that can help. There was one local, but because of COVID, of course,
Right.
it's been on hold for a while. It should restart soon. But these are available in a lot of different regions. And like if you just Google a few things,
Mhm.
um, you might be able to find some, and this is like in person. You can meet other people with ADHD, and
Yeah.
they'll often be directed by somebody who's got some experience coaching.
Okay.
um, and they're really really helpful. So one of these things is there's no cure for ADHD. So it becomes managing
Yep.
how it affects your life. Um, what I say, so modern treatments follow a path of educating about the symptoms. So you start by learning about what the symptoms can be and how they affect your life. And then it's sort of developing a treatment program that can help you deal with that. And that might be, a pharmaceutical treatment. But it's usually the way they would do this is the pharmaceuticals would be in, they would sort of be uh, they would go along with the therapy. Like the stimulant is there to help you focus on the therapy, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So it's
That makes
and
total
and
sense.
I think a lot of times the goal is to not, that the stimulants shouldn't be a permanent
Yeah.
solution, right? Because they can be addictive, and they probably have other side effects. I've actually never tried any.
Okay.
um, but again, the ADHD, knowing that I have ADHD is fairly new to me.
Right.
um, and my doctors have said, you seem pretty put together for
Like you're
someone with
okay.
ADHD. Yeah, so you're
Yeah.
probably fine. Um, and I think we've discussed the same thing with my son. Like, you know, he's we almost got some stimulants for him, but he's kind of gotten past a few of those things. And
Awesome.
and just and it really is like having that educational part of it as a sort of a baseline is such a huge part of managing ADHD. It's sort of a um, the um, really the first step in managing it and treating it. Um, and I covered that little bit.
Is there, in terms of the stimulants part, is that, say that they were to prescribe it, does that work for everyone, like hands down, or is it more of like a,
Yeah, and that's an interesting question too, because there's a not only like a huge number of different people with ADHD, but there's a bunch of different stimulants. So um, not every stimulant will work for everyone with
right?
ADHD. And so there can be, I think you mentioned, there can be some trial and error in that, where a doctor may suggest this particular drug, and it might be too strong or not strong enough. And they'll be balancing the dosage, or maybe trying a different drug completely,
Okay.
or trying other treatments.
Yeah.
So that it can be difficult to find those solutions. Yeah.
Lots of trial and error, I
Mhm,
imagine.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Okay. Finally, is there anything you'd like to say, regarding ADHD or managing ADHD, or tips?
Yeah. So number one, the number one thing about managing ADHD is building good routines. And I say good routines because people will build routines all the time, and that could be you get home from work and you open a beer and you sit on the couch and watch a game. That's a routine, but it's not a good routine, right?
Got
So the
it.
good routine would be get home, make dinner, wash the dishes, do your homework, then get a beer and sit on the couch and watch the
Got
game,
it.
right?
Okay.
So and that applies to all kinds of different things. It's that's even just your morning routine. That's what a lot of people talk about in coaching, is having a good morning routine. It's like you get up at the same time, you have a shower, you have something to eat, and you maybe there's some other things you do, but and then you go to work. Uh, um, so and the other thing I mentioned too, that's actually really helped me a lot, is keeping a journal.
Okay.
Um, and there's I don't know if you've ever heard of a bullet journal.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this a lot of people that coach ADHD recommend bullet journaling because it's so versatile,
Yeah.
and you can yeah, you can use it for anything, and
Yeah.
I love it. Um, I came across this about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been using it almost daily. It's great,
Okay.
and it's just a thing where like it's basically learning a skill about planning,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times, one of the one of the one of the really weird things about ADHD is people kind of get stuck. Like if you're doing something, you're doing this, I don't know, even reading a book, um, you kind of get stuck doing this thing. You're kind of you're reading a book. You don't want to do anything else.
Right.
So it can be really hard to put that aside to do something else.
Okay.
But if you plan your day ahead, uh, oh well, I'm reading this book and then I'm going to do this other thing.
Okay.
you it's
You have it in
easier
your mind.
yeah, you kind of have it ahead of time in your head that oh, I'm going to I have time to read a book for 2 hours, and then I'll put it down, and then I'll do these other things, and then I can do my homework or whatever. But if you've got that sort of planned out, it's easier for you to switch topics, like to switch activities. um, uh, and this is actually something that I see this in my son at school. It's really hard for him when he's been given a task to say do this math assignment, and then when it's over, he doesn't want to do the next assignment, and a lot
Okay.
of it is because he's sort of not expecting it.
Yeah.
And he's kind of still stuck on this other thing, like his head is still in this other thing, and he can be really reluctant to just move on to the next task.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a really common thing for people with ADHD to just and I think it's associated with the hyper focus. Like
Yeah.
you once you start getting rolling on something, you're almost like on tracks, right? And your hyper focus takes you down this road, and
Yeah.
there's no getting off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Peter. Really appreciate your personal anecdotes and your general information about ADHD. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure. I love talking about ADHD. I think it's really important. Like because there's a lot of stigma,
Agree.
um, but with a bit of education, I think that some of that stigma can be mitigated, right? Like people can get past that.